going, people? So this video is truly fascinating. I'm not gonna lie. I caught a few. I didn't really actually watch it to the end, but I did catch quite a bit of this video when I was driving the other day. It kind of just came up in my feed. I shouldn't say driving. When I was walking the other day, it came up in my feed. And this video, yeah, like I said, it's really fascinating. It opened up it really opened my mind to the importance and the link between language and the way that essentially we process the world, and how those two things are really inseparable. The entire concept of language being parasitical, it seems bizarre when you say it initially, but after you watch this, hopefully it will just highlight some things that you took for granted in terms of the way that you process the world, and it will cause you to reanalyze your decision-making process. At least it did for me. Anyway, let me not ramble, probably cut this all out. Let's get into this video. This video is shared by a guy called Chase Hughes. Okay, and it says language has a very dark secret. So it's a pretty popular video. It's nearly 500,000 views, and it was only posted 7 days ago. So but it's really interesting. So I just wanted to share it with you guys and have a little bit of a discussion around some of the things that jumped out at me. Okay, let's go.
There is a kind of parasite in your mind right now. It's stopping you from seeing reality. And I want to tell you that I'm not using that word poetically. I mean the biological definition of a parasite. And a parasite has 4 basic traits. It needs a host. It consumes the resources of the host. It alters the host's behavior to promote its own survival. And 4, it replicates through the host into a new host. Language meets every criteria of a parasite, and I'm going to prove it to you. So
that's really interesting, first of all. When I first heard this, it felt a bit reachy, but then I started thinking, actually, it's not just language that meets that, it's also ideology that meets that. And to be honest with you, one of the first things that came to my mind is this entire system of WS, or something supremacy, that we all live under currently, that actually fits the 4 criteria for being a parasite that he's just mentioned there. And actually, I think it more overtly and precisely fits it than even language. So it's quite, I always talk about the fact that people who are racist essentially are suffering from a mental illness. But I actually like the framing of it being a parasite even better. They may be suffering from a mental, almost like a hive mind, for want of a better word, but it's almost like a mental substitution or mental abstraction, where something else, a bigger system, is controlling several members using this giant parasite, this giant hive mind, to get all of its arms and its tentacles act in a certain way and passing certain laws and being violent and stealing and extracting, and all of these things are operating under this humongous octopus, this parasitic octopus that we can call white supremacy. It's quite an interesting concept. Anyway, let me carry on.
Literally show you this thing inside of your head right now. I'm going to put something very simple on your screen, but I don't want you to think about it. I just want you to notice what your mind does the moment that it appears on the screen. Are you ready? Here it is. I guarantee you something happened inside your head before you realized it. We're going to go to experiment number 2 now. I just want you to watch what your mind does. Here it is. And instantly, without your permission, your mind starts whispering in your head. Mona Lisa, Da Vinci, famous painting, triangle, before your eyes were done looking. You didn't experience the thing first. Your brain named it first. Most people don't realize it, but this happens to our entire lives. We label emotions before we feel them. We label people before we get to know them. We label ourselves before maybe we get a chance to decide if something is true or not.
See this, and this is the part I think of the video that I found very intriguing, because what this highlighted to me is the link between the way we process the world and the words we've been given. And so, in many ways, it actually highlighted to me something that maybe is a little bit more abstract than what he's talking about, but actually highlighted to me the importance of vocabulary. What I mean when I say this is about having a broad enough diction to describe circumstances, experiences, and environments that you find yourself in, either present or even historically, or even looking towards the future. If you don't have certain words, concepts don't materialize. They disappear. They don't form. And I could give a really good example of this. I do a lot in history, a lot of historical research. I like looking into like American history, for instance, and it's only recently that I've started using the term Jim Crow to describe that period post-slavery, to really to kind of like the mid 1950s, but let's say to the present day, for want of a better term. Without that term, you know that there's these series of events that took place that actively deconstructed Black progress, targeted Black people, essentially found a way of persecuting them, gave advantage to other groups. But if you don't have a single term to describe it, what happens is you have all of these loose concepts and it's really hard to tie them together. Another more recent one I could probably give you is the term redlining, which people, that's only a recent, I only started hearing about redlining about 3 years ago. Now I know it existed before then and I know people described it before then, but I guess it only fell into my vocabulary much more recently. Once again, having this knowledge of these practices, these financial practices that were taking place, these property practices that were taking place, these economically limiting practices that were taking place, these deliberate and deconstructive practices that were taking place, but without having a term to describe it, meant that you had a whole bunch of these different separate acts, things that were taking place, and you didn't have an umbrella way of describing it, and it made it very, really, really hard. So without these overarching terms existing to help you to contextualize exactly what was taking place, what happens is the truth of that period or the truth of these practices gets lost. It gets lost in the melee. You all of a sudden aren't able to describe it, and then you're not able to pass that knowledge on. So what this highlighted to me is actually it's really important that we utilize, and where they don't exist, we construct and we coin terms to describe certain things that have happened. And this goes across the board. This could be, looking back towards ancient history. One thing that Europeans have known for a long time is the importance of words and naming. I know lots of people in the comment are going to talk about the fact it's called spelling for a reason. It's used to cast spells, or at least to control the human mind. The words and the vocabulary within a language actually dictate the behaviors of the people who exist beneath that language. And he's just highlighted that really well. It's like, yes, if you need certain words, you need the words to describe things. Otherwise, those things get lost. I was even thinking about, like, for instance, apartheid South Africa. Imagine if we didn't have the word apartheid. We just had this period of time when we knew if we didn't have that word apartheid, then the acts of apartheid would have just been lost to overarching colonialism, and no one would have a word to describe it. It's like, oh, we'll just get over it, South Africans. It's just, everyone was colonized, but because we have this term to describe this period of time that where you had these separatist laws and this kind of like illegal land appropriation and extraction, now we're able to separate the acts that took place within that dispensation of time, describe it aptly and accurately, and hopefully prevent something like that from happening in the future. So it was just very, very interesting. I know I've just spoken specifically about kind of like dispensations, but this actually just goes across the board, even in Africa itself, where we've had the toponyms, changed across the continent. And a lot of them have been changed to European names that are meaningless to us historically. And just literally the changing of the name of a landmass or of a local landmark or of a group of people or of a city, of a town, instantly creates a disconnect from a people and their history. It's such, yeah, this is mind blowing. This is such a deep concept. Now, I know he hasn't gone anywhere near where I'm heading with this, but I want you to think on those levels. The parallel exists. We are so dictated to in terms of the language that we exist beneath, and the acts and the actions and the life that we live out. They're intrinsically linked, and that's quite a powerful concept.
Language is jumping in front of every experience and it's hijacking it. Let me show you just how deep this really goes. Your language doesn't just name things. Your language creates the categories of things that you see. As an example, different cultures divide the world in completely different ways. And because of that, they literally perceive different realities. If your language has no word for a certain color, your brain becomes way slower or even completely unable to see that color. The category shapes the perception. So your language.
So I'm going to jump on that point there because I actually did a study about that. So I would say it's not even a case of your mind becoming slower when he's talking about colors, because I did a study recently about the color blue and the fact that historically it's a relatively recent color. It didn't exist until really like the last, couple thousand years, maybe 3,000 years. And that's not to say that the color itself wasn't isolated, because the first people to isolate the color blue were the ancient Egyptians, and they had a name for it. It was called Ertiu or Irtu. Okay, I'm not going to go into that right now, but the point being that yes, they did isolate it, but it wasn't a standalone color. Okay, blue existed within the black color family. And I know a lot of you are going to be like, that doesn't make any sense. How does blue and black exist in the same family? They're different colors. They're only different colors in our world. One of the best examples I can give you of that is, I want you to think about, other than the sky, okay, which we all now agree is the color blue, name something else that nature produces that's blue, if you can. Now, if you've struggled to name something else that is naturally blue, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, by the way. I know there's a butterfly, but even butterflies that are blue aren't actually blue. It's just the way that they reflect in the light. But they haven't actually got any blue pigment. It's actually the way that it's basically the way they're reflecting light. The point that I'm making is that nature rarely produces blue. If you look around your room, look around your neighborhood, look around your houses, all these street signs, this, that, and the other, blue is everywhere. It's one of our favorite man-made colors. But take away mankind's, manufactured pigments, blue pigments that we have created, our paints and this, that, and the other, and nature doesn't really produce blue that much. So if you was to go back a few thousand years, you wouldn't be seeing blue everywhere. In fact, blue would be a really rare color. So the reason I raise this is because if blue, I wouldn't say didn't exist, but blue was so rare that they were able to essentially just place it within the color group of black. And as a result of it not having its own kind of like isolated existence, it became less important to describe. And as a result of being less important to describe, you didn't need to see it. So it wasn't a case of you were cognitively degenerating. It was a case of you didn't need to describe it. Another example I can give of this is, think about one of the colors that we're most surrounded with. We don't really have a isolated word of describing it. And that color that I'm talking about is actually the color that the sun produces. People say, oh, well, the sun produces white light. It's like, no, maybe when it's cloudy, it produces white light. The sun produces a light that sits somewhere between yellow and white. And that color is actually the most common color for light that we have. Most incandescent bulbs are this kind of like color that sits between white and yellow. And yet we as a group of people, we've never sought to give this its own name. We've never sought to describe this kind of like whitish yellow light. We haven't given it a name. But imagine if we gave it a name and it was like, I don't know, I don't know, Wheelo. Okay. So imagine we gave it a name and the color of this white and yellow light is Wheelo. Now that I've said Wheelo, and if I was to go out and say, okay, I want you to identify all of the Wheelo colored things that you come across today. This is actually almost this is a Wheelo colored top. Some people will call it off-white, but it's almost like it's almost a Wheelo colored top. But if I was to ask you to go out and identify all of you'd find that you start seeing Wheelo a lot more. And all of a sudden, Wheelo, from being this concept that I've just made up, now becomes this very real and tangible thing. I know it sounds like I'm kind of waffling on a weird one, but essentially what I'm talking about is the fact that things don't truly exist until we name them. So if we don't name something, if we don't give something a label, and I was having a conversation with a guy called Chris Grandison, actually, and I encourage you to check out on one of my other channels. And we were talking about basically Black masculinity and how essentially it's probably one of the most feared. Well, Black masculinity is the most feared masculinity on the planet. Black people are globally seen, or Black men are globally seen as the most masculine men on the planet. And he was talking about the fact that because of that, the structures around us have been created to be maladaptive to Black development, or at least to the development of the Black male mind. Now, some of you are thinking, well, what are you talking about here? But what I was really impressed with was he's essentially applied evolutionary psychology to racial theory and utilized that term maladaptive, which essentially means something that has a deconstructive effect on a group of people, to this theory. And that term itself was really useful because it made it real. It's now, I'm able to describe this now. I can talk about when I'm going into a certain environment, and that environment might be maladaptive for me or maladaptive for my child. Or I'm going to a school and I'm like, this school has a maladaptive nature for the development of Black individuals. So once again, being able to name things is very useful. Going back to what I was talking about actually with the color blue, just kind of like a little bit of a history lesson. The color blue has always been associated with Black. So for instance, the ancient Egyptian gods, when the Egyptians isolated or were the first people to isolate blue, they simply just used that color to paint all of their gods who had already been described as Black or the Great Black. So they had terms like Kemwer, which essentially means the Great Black, or Kemitiyu, which means Black people, etc., etc. They had all of these terms, but what you'd find they started doing is using blue pigment. So gods like Osiris, who was described as the Great Black Osiris, you'd see him being painted in blue or sometimes green. This didn't mean he was literally blue or green, because blue and green were both accepted into this broader Black family. It was perfectly logical to use blue to paint them. In Europe, Black, very, very dark-skinned Black people who in the Black community we describe as blue-Black, they describe Black people as Blaumen. Okay, Blaumen means blue men. That's how the Norse described Black people. They'd say, oh, they're Blaumen, blue men, blue and Black, same family. Even if you look at the Eastern religions, the South and Southeastern religions, they're gods like Krishna, who's painted blue. Krishna literally means the Black one. That's what the term Krishna means. So Krishna was acknowledged to be a fully Black god, but if you see the illustrations of him, they utilize blue to color him. So yeah, it's just really interesting how our conceptualization and our ability to visualize the world is intrinsically linked with the words that we know. So I guess you could use that as a motivation to A, get your vocabulary up when it comes to things that are important to you. So I'm not here trying to, I don't think my vocab's great, but I'm not here trying to flex on you or anything like that. I'm saying literally, if something's really important to you, get your vocab up in that specific field of study. And that will help you infinitely in terms of being able to understand it. Until you have the words, you'll find it much harder to understand it, and you'll forever be clawing at all of these different ideas that are floating around that you haven't been able to ground within a single concept. But yeah, this is really interesting. Let me carry on.
Language isn't really describing your world, it's deciding what your world contains. We do not think with logic. We think with metaphors that we did not choose ourselves. Just think of like the metaphors that we live by. There's thousands that are programmed into our psyche. Time is money. Love is a journey. The mind is a container. None of these things are facts. They're metaphors that became little prisons for us. Every belief that you've ever held, every certainty, every fear, every limitation that you think is just who you
Just on that point of metaphors as well, that's really interesting, because then that gets us thinking about really the origins, or at least gets me thinking about the origins of religion. Because when you think about it, every religion is originally based on a metaphor. The ancient Egyptian kind of religion, for want of a better word, all of the neters, or the natures, where we get the word nature from, by the way, nature is where we get the word nature from, and the word nature and science essentially are interchangeable. So when you had the deification of an ancestor in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, for want of a better word, so basically great people like Osiris, for instance. Osiris was a Sudanese man who lived, and when he was passed into the ancient Egyptian pantheon. So when you have these people that pass, what the idea of passing them into a situation of them being venerated and then being structured within a parable of some sort, used as an illustration, turned into a nature, was that they were going to teach you something or carry a principle that of life or of science that would have been beneficial to everybody. So understanding concepts. So an easy one to understand is the, Hathor that everyone knows. Okay, Hathor was the goddess of fertility. It's said that her head looks like, or at least one of the illustrations of the head of Hathor looks like the womb with the fallopian tubes, the ears kind of like representing the fallopian tubes. And then the principles of Hathor for a woman would help her to be more fertile if you follow those certain principles. Even the women who joined the Het Heru, or the house of Hathor, or so the house of Heru, or the house of many faces, as I've translated it, the woman who joined that, they have this kind of like they have what people have interpreted as horns, but I interpret as the rear legs of the dung beetle and the ball of dung on their head. And the reason they have that depiction is because that ball of dung represents the womb. Inside that ball of dung is the womb, because the dung beetle, or the scarab, which is one of the most sacred creatures in ancient Egyptian theology, is the dung beetle who pushes around its young within this mobile womb. This ball of dung is the mobile womb, and then out of the center of that ball of dung is the seed. And its rear legs, which were on top of the head of the member of the house of many faces, or the house of Heru, pushing around, or at least holding the ball on top of its head, representing the fact that that woman, or that queen, normally who was with child, or had given birth given birth to a child. And I think the king's juxtaposition of that may have been the Capresh crown. So they keep the blue crown, which they call the war crown, because the war crown, the Capresh, is shaped after the rear of the Kepar, or the scarab beetle. And the reason I brought it up is because every single nature or neter is a personification or a zoomorphication of some kind of principle or concept. that was important for us to understand nature and science. So the idea behind the ancient Egyptian gods and the pantheon was actually, the more gods you understand or worship, the greater your knowledge of the earth and existence becomes, which is why, even if you look at the book of, I can't remember what book it was in the Bible that mentions the fact that Solomon, the wisest man on the planet, went to Egypt and he ended up worshipping all of their gods. And, Christians and people of the Abrahamic faith perhaps look at this as a failure in Solomon, when actually it wasn't. It's because he was the wisest man on the planet. He went to Egypt and he wanted to increase his wisdom, so he worshipped all of the gods, or at least he took on the fullness of nature. He wasn't restricted to the rules of the one jealous God. He understood that the one jealous God was limiting his knowledge and limiting his wisdom and understanding. That's a whole another discussion there. Eulogizing those that pass and the personification of the things that they have done to become principles that you then follow, which in essence was then the birthing point of all religious systems. They all kind of followed this kind of path, whereas perhaps they've isolated or think that their one deity, reflects everything. But actually, the idea is that the more gods you know, the more you know, the more you understand science, essentially. So, yeah.
Who you are was shaped inside of a language that you didn't choose. You didn't pick the categories, the metaphors to understand yourself. You didn't pick the metaphors you used to know who you are as a person. You inherited these things. If you grew up and you heard words like lazy or not enough or problematic or dramatic, quiet, difficult, shy, gifted, maybe smart, maybe broken, they didn't describe you, they became you. And the moment that someone labeled you, your mind built a world around that label, and the world became a huge cage. So language doesn't reflect your...
Well, that's a very, very true concept, once again, that he's touched on there. And this is one of the reasons why I think most parents will reflect this sentiment, but at least it's something that we always said about when we were raising our kids, is that you have to be very careful with the words that you speak, that you speak into. We talk about speaking words into the life of your children. When you say words about them, you're not just saying, you're literally speaking words into existence. And this is where this whole idea of spelling comes in. Those words become a spell, which can then play out in the child's life. It's really funny. I bumped into an old friend randomly the other day. Hadn't seen him for years, and I've never particularly liked him. Actually, I've been very disappointed with him. I've always felt quite sorry for him. But I had this conversation with him and I didn't realize how much he hated me. Like, he vehemently hates me. But I never clocked this for this entire time. But we haven't spoken that much. So it didn't really matter, because I don't speak to him very often, so therefore he doesn't have any power over my life. But in the short conversation we had, he spoke so many negative words about me. It actually really did bother me. I was actually, for like a good 12 hours, that whole night, I didn't really sleep well. When someone speaks he spoke words after words, oh, you're this, you're that. And it's obviously stuff that I know. I'm very pragmatic about my own personality. I know my flaws and I know my strengths, and I'm very comfortable with that. But he spoke all of these characteristics about me, which I know don't represent my personality at all, but it still bothered me. And that showed me, if someone who I don't care about, who I don't speak to often, and who I don't respect, and that's all of those three things are absolutely 100% true, can speak words over me and they still had an effect and some effect over me, then that shows you how powerful words are. When people try and give you this whole idea that our words don't matter, this, that, and the other, actually, one of the things you have to be very careful and very cognizant about is we live in this world where we are hyper connected and we are overstimulated. And one of the things is we all have access to speak words to people, even without touching them, without meeting them. I have access to 10,000 opinions at any given moment. I know if you're subscribed to this channel, you probably only see like I've only got a few, not even a couple thousand subs on this channel, but on my other channels, I've got hundreds of thousands of subs across networks. And at any given moment in time, any given hour, I can basically access 100 different opinions about me, because that's roughly how many comments probably get produced in an hour on my various networks, probably 100 or so every hour. That's quite powerful, or at least can be quite powerful, depending on how you process that. So be very, very careful of the way, as a parent, or at least even as a friend, the words that you speak over people, particularly people that you care about, because you really do literally curse or empower or help people with the words that you speak. It really, words cast a spell, whether or not you mean it. Your words have a negative or positive effect. Because for someone like me, who I think is very mentally strong and very kind of like aware of these things and able to disconnect myself, the fact that I could have one conversation with someone who I didn't respect and it still had an impact on me, it taught me something about the nature of the words that we speak to those who are around us and how important they are.
Your identity. It constructs the identity. In my opinion, the scariest part of that is once the construction of the identity is complete, we defend it like crazy. We protect the thing that is limiting us. We say things like, that's just my personality, or I've always been like this. Like our identity is some kind of geological fact instead of a language program. But answer this question honestly, and this is another experiment. If you had been raised in another family, another culture, another language with different labels and different metaphors and different narratives, would you be the same person? Of course not.
And that's really interesting. This video is very interesting because it makes you think about so many other things. Because I started off talking about, white supremacist culture, and I could apply that back here again when he's asking this question. Like people kind of accept it and they don't realize it's just a program, and it doesn't, the things that they've been taught about themselves and other groups of people aren't necessarily true. They're just the words that they've essentially been granted. But then looking at it even more powerfully, I think, on a personal level, because I even said, just in the run up to this, I already said that I know my character, but how much of what I've accepted to be my character is changeable program that I've kind of accepted, well, this is just what I'm like. Now, I like to think that I'm accepting of the characteristics that I've chosen because that's what I'm comfortable with. And I guess that would be in many ways a healthy place to be. But there is always still that possibility that take me out of this environment, this culture, and this set of words, this set of, this language that defines your behavior, and place me in a different culture. If I was to up sticks and move to Cambodia and then surround myself with the local Cambodian culture, or I was to up sticks and move to Kenya, and join a local Maasai tribe, what then would become the words that define me, the words that define my character, the words that define my personality? It's quite interesting. It's a very, very interesting concept that he's kind of raised here.
So that means that our identity is not the pure, authentic me that I think I am. It's a side effect of language that raised us. You've only met the version of you that language allowed you to be. And we spend our lives trying to live up to a sound, a word. And language takes every experience that you have and cuts it down to fit inside of a category that existed way before we were ever born. You never met your mother as she truly is. You met the word mother. You met mom. You started defining it as mom as fast as you can. In fact, that's the oldest known word ever discovered, as a fun fact. How many arguments have you had with people that were never about the situation? They were about the words that you and someone else used to describe the situation. How many moments of connection were maybe ruined because people used the same word that had different meaning. And if you think,
well, and this is a very kind of poignant fact that he's raising here. The fact of the matter is, almost every conflict, every historical act, every fight, and even every positive relationship, they're all built through words. Imagine what you'd lose if you suddenly became a mute and you weren't able to talk and express yourself, and maybe you weren't able to write either. Imagine just losing that kind of like ability to connect through words. I don't think people realize how important words are. And I do find it somewhat tickling when people mention the fact that, someone who was known for spreading hate, okay, and people, and then when that person, passes away, everyone's like, oh, it was only words, you never actually hurt anyone. It's like, words do more than anything, okay? An individual, if Adolf Hitler, was just literally went out there just with a machete and murked as many as he could, murked as many peeps as he could, he would have been lucky to get into the hundreds, okay? But with words, you're able to, get to a lot more. Now, I don't even want to use that as an analogy because I think it's a flawed one. And, I'm not going to go into that, but those who know will know why I think it's a flawed analogy. But it's at least one that will land where people kind of understand the point that I'm getting at, is that actually it's words, it was the words of a King Leopold or Winston Churchill that saw the genocides of masses and masses of Congolese and or Australasian people. Okay, so words are words are powerful.
Think about your emotions. A lot of people don't feel sad. They feel the word sadness and everything that the culture taught us to attach to the word sadness. And if you think that you're bored with your life, or maybe you're bored in life right now, I promise that you're not. You're just seeing the world through some linguistic categories that are on repeat. Chair, bottle, hand, normal. All of a sudden, your life becomes a slideshow of things that we already think we totally understand because we have a label for it. It turns.
So I'm kind of disagree with him slightly there, particularly about people who suffer from sadness, loneliness, depression. I don't think they're thinking about those words individually. I think they're feeling an emotion, and perhaps most of the words that we use to describe those emotions, like sadness, loneliness, depression, don't even sum up exactly how they feel inside. I think the feeling that they have supersedes the available kind of like diction, the available vocabulary to describe it. So I disagree on that point, I'd have to say.
The sacred things into ordinary things. I want you to feel something and try it out. Wherever you are, look at the nearest object in the room, wherever you're sitting, wherever you're standing. Don't pick a special one, just whatever's closest. Maybe it's a water bottle or a chair, or maybe it's your hand, anything at all. So, all right, you got it? Good. So now, just for 2 seconds, refuse. I want you to absolutely refuse to name that thing. Don't say the word in your head. Don't categorize it. Don't reach for the concept of what it is. Just look at it without any language. Right there. Notice how fast your mind tries to name it automatically. It's desperate. It can't stand not knowing what to call something. So it's like the mind panics when language goes silent. And I think it does this because without language, you become present. There's a sudden sharpness, increase of reality and clarity. There's a moment of raw, just presence that almost feels like a memory from childhood. That's how
I kind of get that. I kind of do get that, because this was my object that I stumbled across. Okay, a pair of sunglasses. Couldn't use this word sunglasses. Kept referring back to the word glass, but I did notice the trend was within myself. Describe it. Now, he didn't say to describe it. There was no reason to describe it. There was no instruction that I needed to describe it, but I felt I just felt the need to describe it. That's programming. That's a linguistic programming that we have. And as much as I've argued, and I'm going to stand by arguing the fact that actually We need words to describe certain things to make them real. That's a reality. It's just interesting when those words, or when we ask ourselves to turn those words off, there is an interesting thing that happens where you become more present, when you turn the words off and you just kind of like interact with the thing without words. It's weird. It's weird. That's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out the application of it though. I guess this is what happens when people meditate, when they're just present, but without. I think the most powerful thing when you meditate, the most powerful thing that you're actually trying to switch off more than anything, is the words. It's words. It's those words running through your mind, casting that spell constantly on your actions.
Drive it anyway. That's what the world feels like without the parasite jumping in line. The parasite can still be there, but you're just putting it in its actual place where it's meant to be, behind the experience. I want you to think of the most real moment in your entire life, the moment that punched through everything, like the birth of a child, maybe a breakup, maybe a death, maybe it was a moment of terror, or maybe it was the kind of just incredible awe that just shuts down your breathing. In that moment, there weren't any words. None. Language arrived after that experience, and then it tried to shrink that thing into a sentence, because language couldn't hold the size of what happened. That is your proof. Every moment that you felt truly alive in your life was so much bigger than the language that you used to describe it. And if language was just a tool, then we could put it down, but we can't. Try not naming something for 10 seconds. The brain goes into a panic.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I didn't want this video to be too long, but I did want to kind of introduce it. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with this concept, and I'm not sure where I've gone with this concept, but I still thought it was an interesting video to watch, and just want to see where you guys kind of land with it. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about what he's spoken here? Do you agree that words are a parasite? What do you think of some of the inputs or the insights that I gave in terms of my own personal interpretation of some of his findings and how they apply to the real world? I don't know. Let me know. Leave a comment. Let's have a conversation. Hope you had a good one. Catch you next one. Peace.